They demanded I pay $250,000 in fines, yes, $250,000 for supposed violations of HOA regulations they claimed had accumulated over the past 5 years. They also tacked on legal fees and made up penalties for unauthorized construction, all on land I had legally inherited. The irony: turns out they were the ones who had illegally built homes on my property. Where are you tuning in from? Drop a comment and let me know. And stick around, because this is just the beginning of a battle that turned a laid-off IT engineer into an unexpected Montana rancher squaring off against a powerful HOA board with deep political connections. When they tried to slap a lien on my late grandfather's land, I decided to push back, and I wasn't just defending soil and timber. I was standing up for legacy, for justice, and for myself. Funny thing is, I didn't even know if I wanted to keep the land when this all started. 6 months ago, I was Mike Carson, 35 years old, writing code in a high-rise office in downtown Seattle. Life was good until the tech crash hit. One day I had a stable six-figure salary. The next I was out of work. The startup I had poured 3 years of sweat and late nights into folded when our funding evaporated. I'll never forget our CEO during that last company-wide Zoom call, eyes hollow, voice shaking, as he told us there would be no severance, no final paycheck. Just goodbye. Like thousands of others, I hit the job market immediately, but the competition was brutal. Every job I applied for had 100 applicants, many more experienced or desperate than me. Just when things couldn't feel heavier, I got a phone call that changed everything. My grandfather, James Carson, had passed away peacefully at 89. We had been close when I was young. Summers on his Montana ranch had been the highlight of my childhood. He taught me to ride horses, fish, fix fences, and respect the land. But as adulthood consumed my time, our visits became fewer and farther between. Still, the news shook me, and then came the second blow. Grandpa had left me his entire ranch. 100 acres of Montana soil, barns, fencing, and a 2-bedroom house, mine now. I loaded up my car and drove east, unsure how to feel. The ranch was filled with memories, but I knew nothing about running one. My plan was simple: clean it up, sell it, and use the money to rebuild my life back in Seattle. The drive gave me time to reflect. I remembered Grandpa's stories, how the land had been in our family for over a century, passed down from his father. I remembered the creaking porch swing, the scent of cut hay, and the way he used to whistle as he walked the property line. But arriving changed something. The house looked just like I remembered, nestled on a gentle slope above a trickling creek. The barn stood weathered but sturdy, and the fields rolled out in golden waves under the Montana sun. What didn't belong were the rows of freshly built luxury homes I saw just past the far fence. Cookie-cutter mansions with matching driveways and landscaped yards, an entire HOA community encroaching on what should have been untouched ranch land. That's when I realized something was wrong, very wrong. And this quiet piece of land my grandfather left behind was about to become the front line in a war I never asked for, but one I wasn't about to lose. The house was exactly as Grandpa had left it, frozen in time. A half-empty coffee mug still sat in the kitchen sink. Dust had gathered on every surface, but it wasn't just the physical stillness that struck me, it was the absence of him. The quiet hum of the place that once felt so alive now echoed with memory. His old leather recliner remained by the living room window, angled just right to overlook the fields. A worn book lay open on the side table beside it, like he'd only stepped away for a moment. I ran my fingers along the edge of his desk, remembering how he used to sit there in the evenings, scribbling into his leather-bound journal with the same pen he'd used for decades. While sorting through the scattered papers on his desk, a sharp knock came at the door. I opened it to find an older woman, probably in her 70s, with steel gray hair tied back in a no-nonsense ponytail and skin browned from a lifetime of ranch work. "You must be James's grandson," she said plainly. "I'm Barbara Thompson, Barb, your grandfather's neighbor for 30 years. Heard you inherited the place." Her handshake was firm, her gaze steady. James was a good man, one of the few left around here who stood his ground when those vultures came circling. Before I could ask what she meant, she pointed toward the envelope I'd found tucked into the front door when I arrived. I'd assumed it was a condolence card or a flyer from the local church. "You might want to open that," she said. He'd been getting those for months before he passed. I think they played a part in his health going downhill, if you ask me. I tore the envelope open while Barb pulled out a chair at the kitchen table like she belonged there. She set her trucker's cap down and waited for me to read. Inside was a formal-looking letter from the Sun Valley Homeowners Association demanding immediate payment of $250,000, yes, the same figure I'd eventually see again, for alleged violations, legal fees, and unauthorized construction fines dating back 5 years. The letter broke it down like this: $70 failure to maintain landscaping to community standards, $50 for unauthorized agricultural activity, $40 for improper fencing and boundary errors, $850 in legal and administrative fees. At the bottom, in bold, failure to pay within 30 days would result in a lien on the property. I stared at the letter stunned. What the hell is this? Grandpa's ranch isn't even part of a housing community. And these violations, this place hasn't changed in 40 years. Barb let out a snort. That's Victoria Reynolds and her Sun Valley HOA, she said with obvious contempt. Started building that luxury development you saw on your way in about 5 years ago. At first, it was just a few homes, but they've been expanding fast like cancer. Your granddad refused to sell when they offered to buy him out, and ever since they've been doing everything they can to pressure him off the land. Started claiming his property was within their jurisdiction and violating HOA rules. I dropped into the chair across from her, still clutching the letter. But how can they claim land that isn't theirs? There have to be boundaries, legal records, property lines, surveys. That's what James said too, Barb replied, nodding. He was digging into it when his heart gave out. Said something didn't add up. He started gathering documents, said there was a folder in his study marked boundaries. Told me if anything happened, I should make sure you knew. Said you were sharp enough to figure it out. Did he talk to a lawyer? I asked, the weight of it all starting to hit me. I hadn't just inherited a ranch. I'd inherited a fight worth $250,000 and maybe more. Tried to. Barb replied, her face tightening with frustration. But Victoria's got half the lawyers in the county on retainer, some through the HOA, others through her various consulting outfits. And the few who aren't directly working for her, they're too scared to go up against her in court. Your grandfather was planning to drive to Billings to hire someone out of her reach, but she stopped there, the silence finishing the sentence for her. I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of what he must have been facing alone. That afternoon, I combed through Grandpa's files, grateful once again for his meticulous nature. Every invoice, deed, and letter had its place. Eventually, I found a weathered manila folder labeled Boundaries in his faint, trembling script. Inside, a 1952 survey map marked the original land boundaries from when my great-grandfather purchased the ranch. There were also handwritten notes questioning discrepancies in newer surveys, along with photographs of fence posts and stone markers, some now sitting deep within what was clearly Sun Valley's newest row of homes. It didn't take a legal degree to see what had happened. The newer documents showed the property line creeping inward by as much as 300 yards. Grandpa had documented everything. His gut had been right. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing him in this house watching people build on land he knew wasn't theirs, trying to fight back while being ignored and outnumbered. It made my blood boil. I'd inherited a ranch in a mess, but more than that, I'd inherited his unfinished battle. And for the first time since I arrived, I knew I wasn't selling the place. Not until this was resolved. The next morning, Barb and I drove into town and walked into the county records office. The building, a faded relic of the 1950s, smelled faintly of paper and mildew. Behind the counter sat Jenny, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s who'd apparently seen everything this town had to offer. She greeted us with a knowing look. "You must be James's grandson," she said, pulling up records before I could even ask. "Your grandfather was in here often near the end. Always said something wasn't right with those new boundary claims from Sun Valley." She lowered her voice. "Between you and me, a lot of folks around here feel the same way. Victoria Reynolds throws a lot of money around. Things tend to go her way until now, maybe." Jenny turned her monitor so we could see. "Here's the county's official 1952 survey. Your great-granddad's deed matches it exactly. And this," she clicked over to another window, "is the 2019 survey submitted by Sun Valley for their Phase 2 expansion." Even without a ruler, the difference was clear. The newer lines had shifted, cutting deep into what should have still been Carson land. My land. "Can we get an independent survey done to confirm this?" I asked. Jenny nodded without hesitation. "I've already put in a call to Bill Matthews. He's the most respected surveyor in the county, and more importantly, he doesn't owe Victoria Reynolds a thing." He'll be out at your place first thing tomorrow. I blinked. That was fast. Jenny smiled, and for the first time I noticed something fierce behind her warmth. Your grandfather had a lot of friends in this county, Mr. Carson. More than you might realize. And a whole lot of them are ready to see this made right. Bill showed up right at 8:00 a.m. the next morning, punctual to the minute. He was a man of few words, mid-60s, weather-beaten face, and hands so calloused they looked carved from stone. Everything about him spoke of someone who'd spent a lifetime outdoors. He barely said a word as he unloaded his surveying gear and got to work, nodding only when I offered him coffee. For the next several hours, we walked the property together while he measured distances, checked old landmarks, cross-referenced GPS coordinates, and compared everything to both the 1952 and 2019 surveys. I tried making small talk at one point, but Bill clearly belonged to that rare breed who thought talking only slowed things down. It wasn't until mid-afternoon that he finally motioned for me to follow him to his truck. He spread a large map across the hood and pointed to it with a pencil. Based on the original survey markers, official county records, and confirmed GPS coordinates, he began his voice slow and steady. Roughly 10 acres of what's now considered part of the Sun Valley development actually falls within the legal boundary of Carson land. He tapped the map again for emphasis. That includes 15 residential homes in their newest section and half their fancy clubhouse. A jolt of vindication surged through me, followed quickly by disbelief. So let me get this straight, I said. They built luxury homes on my grandfather's land and then fined him for violations. Bill gave a small shrug. Not the first time I've seen a developer redraw the lines to suit their needs. But this one's blatant. You've got a rock-solid case. He began folding up his maps with clinical efficiency. I'll have the notarized report ready for you by tomorrow. You'll want legal representation fast. That's easier said than done, I admitted. Apparently, Victoria Reynolds has most of the county's attorneys tied up in contracts or intimidated. Bill paused, then grunted. Call Ben Hawkins in Billings. He's my brother-in-law. Tough, sharp, and doesn't scare easy. Tell him I sent you. With that, Bill packed on his gear, gave a firm nod, and disappeared in a cloud of gravel dust. I stood alone in the field, holding the map, but now armed with something powerful, truth, and the evidence to back it up. The next morning, clutching Bill's draft report, I drove straight to the Sun Valley HOA office. The building looked like it was trying to cosplay a mountain lodge with faux rustic beams and a giant rock waterfall in the lobby. Tasteful photos of Montana landscapes adorned the walls, and soft instrumental music played from hidden speakers. The receptionist, a polished young woman with a gleaming smile and manicured nails, took one look at me and instantly filed me under, not worth her time. Ms. Reynolds is very busy, she said coolly. If you're here about the HOA violation letter, you'll need to submit a formal appeal in writing. It's more serious than that, I replied, keeping my voice even. I have legal evidence showing that Sun Valley's Phase 2 development was built on Carson land. Ms. Reynolds may want to speak with me directly. That word evidence made her pause. She picked up the phone, murmured a few words, and then stood. This way, please. She led me to a sleek corner office with panoramic windows overlooking the development. There, behind an imposing desk, sat Victoria Reynolds herself, mid-40s, polished, poised, and intimidating, in a tailored suit that likely cost more than my monthly rent back in Seattle. Her jet-black bob was precision cut, and her smile was razor-sharp. Mr. Carson, she said smoothly, not bothering to stand. What a pleasure to finally meet you. I was sorry to hear about your grandfather. James? Well, he was resistant to progress. I hope you'll be more open to the idea of joining our community. I placed Bill's notarized survey report squarely on her desk. I think you've been building your community on land that doesn't belong to you, Ms. Reynolds. Her smile twitched, tightening just slightly as she glanced at the document, but didn't bother to touch it. Oh, an independent survey. How quaint. Our development was approved by county planners based on professional surveys conducted by the most reputable firm in the state, she continued smoothly. A firm your company happens to have on retainer, I interrupted, recalling what Barb had mentioned. Victoria's eyes narrowed, though she kept her tone light. Mr. Carson, you have been in town, 2 days, and already you're throwing around accusations based on some old maps and a surveyor who was probably friends with your grandfather. That's not how we do business here. Then how do you do business, Mr. Reynolds, I asked, my voice steady. by fabricating violations against properties you want to acquire, by quietly redrawing boundary lines to absorb land that isn't yours. Her posture remained relaxed, but her smile was gone. I understand that losing a family member can stir up strong emotions. But let's be clear, your grandfather's property has been in violation of multiple county codes for years. The HOA had no choice but to issue those fines. Fines, I said, for violations on land that isn't even legally part of your HOA. That seems problematic. Her mask slipped, revealing a flash of frustration. Sun Valley is the economic future of this county. We create jobs. We raise property values. We bring in tax dollars. Your grandfather's rundown ranch is an obstacle to all of that. We've tolerated it out of respect for his age and tenure, but that patience has limits. Pay the fines or we'll proceed with a lien. Eventually, you'll lose the property altogether. She stood, making it clear the conversation was over. Or you can save yourself the trouble and sell to us now. We're prepared to offer fair market value. Think about it, Mr. Carson. You're a software engineer, not a rancher. This could be a win-win. I left the HOA office seething. How did she know I was a software engineer? It was clear Victoria Reynolds had done her research. She knew exactly who I was and had likely expected me to fold under pressure. Back at the house, Barb was waiting on the porch swing, sipping iced tea. I told her everything. That woman's been trying to buy up every old ranch and family farm within 20 miles, Barb said grimly. She starts with a low-ball offer. If you don't take it suddenly, you're in violation of county codes no one's ever enforced before. Most folks can't afford to fight. They sell. Your grandfather was one of the last to say no. Well, I said, the decision settling in my chest like steel. I'm not selling either. Not now. She trespassed on our land, fined my grandfather into his grave, and thinks I'll roll over because I write code instead of raise cattle. She picked the wrong man. That night, I called Ben Hawkins, the property lawyer Bill had recommended. He listened quietly while I laid everything out, the surveys, the fines, the confrontation. When I finished, he exhaled slowly. Victoria Reynolds, he muttered. Yeah, I know the name. She's got a reputation even up here in Billings. Smart calculating, plays dirty. But if what you're saying holds up, then we're not just looking at civil violations. We're talking about fraud, land theft, and a potential class action suit if others were affected. He agreed to take the case, but warned me this won't be quick and it won't be cheap. She's got deep pockets and no conscience. But if you're ready for a fight, so am I. That evening, I dug into everything I could find about the upcoming Sun Valley HOA meeting, which was scheduled for the following Tuesday. According to their own bylaws conveniently posted on their official website, non-residents were permitted to attend, though they couldn't vote or speak unless granted permission. That was fine by me. I didn't need a vote. I had something better proof. I planned to walk in with Bill's survey in hand, my grandfather's notes, and a whole lot of questions they wouldn't be able to brush off. While I waited for the meeting day, I kept myself busy combing through Grandpa's journals, trying to piece together the full timeline of his struggle. I found entries spanning the last 5 years, pages filled with frustration, resolve, and heartbreak. He had documented each meeting with the HOA, every suspicious zoning notice, each new citation or threat. There were even sketches and boundary notes that aligned with the older survey. It wasn't just property they'd stolen, it was years of his peace. When the night of the meeting arrived, I drove down to the Sun Valley Clubhouse, a sprawling, polished building designed to look rustic in a very expensive kind of way. Exposed beams, stone fireplaces, and panoramic windows offered curated views of the mountains. I couldn't help but smirk, knowing that half of this luxurious monument to entitlement sat illegally on Carson land. I found a seat in the back row of the meeting room, trying to blend in. There were maybe 50 residents in attendance, retirees, in matching golf apparel couples in designer casual wear, and a few sharp-dressed professionals clearly used to having their voices heard. It was a room that reeked of privilege and comfort, the kind that expects tidy lawns, HOA enforcers, and problems to be solved with a phone call. Victoria presided over the meeting from the front, composed and commanding, dressed in what looked like another $1,000 suit. To her right sat a thin, uneasy man she introduced as Gerald White, the HOA's legal counsel. Gerald looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He kept adjusting his tie and fidgeting with his glasses like a man preparing for a storm he hoped wouldn't arrive. The meeting started predictably. Reports on irrigation upgrades, complaints about trash bins, a debate over whether sandstone beige was too close to sunset taupe for exterior house paint. It was excruciating. But as I listened, I began to understand something. This room wasn't just about micromanagement. These people cared about where they lived some deeply, and they had no idea what their HOA had done. When the floor opened for community concerns, I stood up. "I'm Mike Carson," I said, James Carson's grandson. "I recently uncovered evidence showing that a significant portion of this development, including about 15 homes and half of this very clubhouse, was built on land that legally belongs to my family." A ripple of surprise ran through the room. Victoria's practiced smile didn't falter, but her eyes sharpened. "Mr. Carson is understandably emotional," she said with faux sympathy. "Unfortunately, he's relying on a questionable survey that contradicts the official plans approved by the county." "I have the original 1952 property maps," I replied, "and a certified independent survey from a respected county surveyor. This is more than a misunderstanding. It looks like a massive overreach by Sun Valley onto land that was never theirs." At that, Gerald White stood up quickly, his voice shaking slightly. "These are serious and potentially libelous accusations, Mr. Carson. I would urge caution before making unverified claims in a public setting." Before I could respond, a woman from the third row stood. She looked about 40 with confident posture and an intense gaze. "I'd like to see those surveys," she said. "I'm Dana Mitchell, environmental attorney. If there's even a chance my property was built on improperly claimed land, I want to know. We shouldn't be threatened into silence." Victoria moved quickly. "We're happy to handle this through legal channels," she said, voice icy. "This is not the proper venue." Now moving on to the next item, community pool maintenance. As the meeting dragged on, I couldn't help but notice Dana Mitchell watching Victoria with a sharp, calculating gaze. Her eyes narrowed with each evasive comment, and she occasionally tapped notes into her phone. Around the room, I sensed growing tension. A few residents whispered in hushed tones, casting wary glances in my direction. Some hostile, others simply concerned. The illusion of suburban perfection was cracking. After the meeting adjourned, I barely made it to the exit before being surrounded. A group of residents closed in, forming a semicircle of anxious faces. One man, mid-40s, wearing a Sun Valley golf pullover, looked furious. "My family saved for years to build our dream home here," he said, his voice rising. "Are you telling us we might not even own the land it's built on?" "I'm saying Victoria Reynolds may have sold you land that didn't belong to her," I replied as calmly as I could. "That's between you and her. I'm here to protect my grandfather's legacy and what legally belongs to us." A silver-haired woman shook her head. "This is exactly why we left California. Lawsuits, bureaucrats. We came here to get away from all that." "I get it," I said, trying to hold their gaze. "But I didn't start this. I inherited it, and I'm not the one threatening fines and property seizures." Before the conversation could escalate, I felt a tap on my shoulder. It was Dana Mitchell, her face unreadable. She slipped me a card. "Let's talk," she said quietly. "Coffee shop 2 blocks down. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Then she was gone. As I turned to leave, Gerald White appeared out of nowhere, shoving a thick envelope into my chest. "Cease and desist," he snapped. "Your defamatory behavior and disruption of HOA operations are now on record. Oh, and the board has voted to increase the fines on your property. Total balance is now $300,000 due within 30 days. His voice was smug. "Have a nice evening." The next morning, the coffee shop buzzed with life, but Dana had already claimed a corner table. She looked polished in a crisp sweater and jeans, her presence commanding even in a casual setting. She skipped pleasantries and got right to it. "I've had a bad feeling about Victoria Reynolds since the day I moved in," she said, sliding her latte aside. "The HOA fees keep rising and the special assessments are never explained. Anyone who pushes back gets targeted." Silenced, I handed her Bill's survey and my grandfather's original land documents. She reviewed them with care, her lawyer brain clicking into gear. "This is strong," she finally said. "It lines up. But if you challenge her in court, she'll drown you in motions and delays. She's got money influence and half the county officials in her pocket. You'd be fighting uphill for years," I sighed. "So what? Let her get away with it. Let her steal my land and destroy what's left of my grandfather's work." Dana smiled, calm, confident. "Absolutely not. But we don't go through her front door, we go around. She's built her empire on intimidation and secrecy. We break that, and we break her." Over the next hour, she laid out a strategy. No dramatic courtroom showdowns, not yet. Instead, we'd focus on documentation inconsistencies and the misuse of authority. We'd present our findings to regulatory boards, the state surveyor's office, and the press if needed. Her strength comes from fear, Dana said, tapping her finger on the table. But people are starting to question her. We just need to give them the truth and a reason to act. And I know exactly where we should begin. Over the next few days, Dana connected me with Carlos Rodriguez, a veteran construction worker who had been part of the early phases of the Sun Valley development. Carlos was in his mid-50s with deep laugh lines that hinted at a good sense of humor, but his tone turned serious whenever Victoria Reynolds came up. He leaned forward on my porch, elbows on his knees, voice low and steady. She rushed everything Carlos said. We were working crazy hours, cutting corners, skipping inspections. But what bothered me most was the way they handled the property markers. He described a moment that stuck with him. One day, one of the original survey guys flagged a possible issue near where the clubhouse now sits. He told Victoria there was something off with the boundaries. She didn't say much, just pulled him aside. Next morning, he was gone. Replaced, no explanation. New surveyor came in, signed off on everything like there'd never been a problem. It didn't feel right. Dana leaned in. Would you be willing to make an official statement about what you saw? Carlos hesitated, glancing around the quiet street. I still do contract work in this county. Victoria's got a long reach. I nodded. Already expecting that answer. I get it. No pressure. He paused, then added, but my cousin works in the county records office. Might be able to dig into those survey approvals, see if anything changed suddenly off the books. And I know a few guys from back then who were uncomfortable too. Let me ask around. It was more than we'd hoped for. Our quiet resistance grew when Barb introduced me to Sheriff Tom Dawson, a longtime friend of my grandfather. Tom was in his 60s, tall, and built like someone who'd never fully left the farm. He spoke with the careful cadence of someone used to balancing the law with local politics. Your grandfather and I used to fish every spring, he said over coffee at the local diner. Last time I saw him, he mentioned this whole mess, said he was working on something big, never got the chance to finish it. He lowered his voice. Look, officially, I have to stay out of this. But off the record, Victoria's been bullying folks in this county for too long. Wouldn't mind seeing someone finally push back. Dana and I worked up a new legal strategy. Instead of just contesting the HOA fines, we would go on the offensive, formally asserting our family's rightful ownership of the land Victoria had built on and demanding compensation for its unauthorized use. Carlos agreed to quietly provide a statement about the surveyor's sudden dismissal. Sheriff Dawson made it clear he couldn't publicly take sides, but he wouldn't be helping Victoria cover anything up either. We began with a formal letter from Dana disputing the fines and outlining the boundary conflict. We expected pushback, and we got it fast. 3 days later, Sheriff Dawson showed up at my door holding a citation. She had me serve you with a public nuisance warning, he said with a sigh. Claims you're causing disruption by putting up private property signs in the development. I stared at him. Signs I placed on my land. Tom nodded. That's not the point for her. She's trying to rattle you. Make it harder for you to hold your ground. He leaned closer, voice barely above a whisper. She's making calls, pressuring commissioners, trying to paint you as some outsider stirring up trouble. He handed over the citation and gave my shoulder a firm squeeze. Watch your back, son. Victoria doesn't fight fair, and she's just getting started. That truth became undeniable when Victoria held a press conference on the steps of the county courthouse. Standing before a small group of hand-picked local reporters, she portrayed me as a reckless agitator, someone spreading false claims and endangering the prosperity of the entire region. With cameras flashing and microphones pointed at her, she delivered her performance with polished precision. We welcome Mr. Carson to our community. She began, voice full of faux warmth. But his grandfather's years of neglect, and now his grandson's disruptive accusations cannot go unchecked. Sun Valley stands for progress, jobs, revenue, and beautiful homes for families. We won't let one man's personal vendetta halt the forward motion of this county. Her message was clear. I was a problem, an outsider, a threat. Dana and I knew we needed more than righteous anger, we needed proof. Hard, irrefutable evidence that Victoria had knowingly crossed the line. Dana suggested a new tactic I would pose as a prospective buyer interested in one of Sun Valley's homes. It would give me access to their sales materials and allow me to ask questions without raising suspicion. At the same time, she filed a Freedom of Information Act request to obtain the original survey records submitted by Victoria's development team. Meanwhile, Carlos risked everything. Late one night, using a borrowed key card from a friend still working at the construction company, he accessed the archive storage facility where project records were kept. What he uncovered filled in critical gaps. At the same time, I visited the Sun Valley sales office, playing the role of a tech worker looking for a peaceful second home. The agent gave me glossy brochures with site maps and property lines materials that directly contradicted what had been filed with the county. Dana's FOIA request came back with a bombshell. The original 2019 survey had been amended twice quietly and without public notice, each revision creeping deeper into my grandfather's land. And then Carlos found internal emails between Victoria and her senior team. In one, a surveyor raised concerns about overlapping property lines. Victoria's response was chilling. Handle it discreetly. Adjust documentation as needed. We can't afford delays. We tried to take everything to the local paper, hoping the truth would make headlines, but they refused to run the story. Victoria, as it turned out, was one of their top advertisers. Their polite rejection boiled down to one sentence: due to pending legal matters, we will not be covering this issue. Fine. If they wouldn't publish the truth, we would. That night, I launched a Facebook page, The Truth About Sun Valley HOA. We posted our findings, surveys, documents, emails, all carefully worded, avoiding speculation and sticking to verified facts. Within days it spread. Residents started asking questions. Why had their fees increased? Why were promised community upgrades never delivered? Why did the clubhouse sit partially on land, not legally owned by the HOA? Donna stepped forward to help organize those who wanted answers, and soon a core group formed ready to challenge Victoria's hold on the board. In response, Victoria called an emergency HOA meeting. There she convinced the board to increase their offer on my land to $1 million, well over market value, to end what she now called an unfortunate misunderstanding. I turned it down, publicly. On the Facebook page I posted, "This isn't about money. This is about integrity. Until the fraudulent fines are canceled and the property lines corrected, the land stays in my family." That was the moment the story went viral. Sarah Chen, a reporter from the state's largest newspaper, reached out. She was young, driven, and unafraid. A few days later, she was at my ranch with a notebook in hand, reviewing our documents, talking to Dana, Carlos, even Sheriff Dawson. She interviewed former employees of Victoria's firm, people who confirmed it all: the pressure, the manipulations, the lies. Suddenly, it wasn't just a property dispute. It was a statewide scandal, and we were finally being heard. Sarah's in-depth article, titled "Paradise at What Price? The Battle Over Sun Valley's Boundaries," landed on the front page of the Sunday edition and immediately exploded online. She presented every side of Victoria's statements, resident reactions, and most importantly, the documents we had collected showing manipulated surveys and Victoria's clear knowledge of the discrepancies. Her detailed timeline of events, bolstered by interviews with construction workers, former employees, and residents, painted a damning picture. By Monday morning, the article had been shared thousands of times, sparking conversations across the country about property rights and HOA abuse. Victoria responded exactly as expected, with fury. Within 48 hours, she filed a $500,000 defamation lawsuit against me. In her public statement, she claimed I was waging a personal vendetta, weaponizing the media to smear her reputation and sabotage Sun Valley's future. But in Sun Valley itself, things were shifting. Dana's growing coalition of residents began openly questioning HOA finances and leadership decisions. The tide was turning, and even Gerald White, her longtime attorney, quietly suggested it might be time to settle. But Victoria wasn't ready to back down. "We're not negotiating with trespassers," she told her board, still convinced she could outlast us with legal pressure. "This is my project. No one steals that from me." At the preliminary court hearing, Dana represented me pro bono. We stood before Judge Eleanor Simmons, a seasoned jurist known for cutting through drama and focusing strictly on the facts. Dana argued that before the court could even consider defamation or financial penalties, it had to determine one thing: who legally owned the land. Judge Simmons reviewed our documentation, the original 1952 survey, the altered filings from Sun Valley, and sworn statements from Carlos and other construction workers. Then she addressed the courtroom with quiet authority. "Before this court can rule on any civil claims, we must settle the matter of land ownership. I'm ordering a court-supervised third-party survey of the disputed boundaries with representatives from both parties present. Until that survey is completed and reviewed, no liens may be placed on Mr. Carson's property, and all HOA fines are suspended. She scheduled the full hearing 3 months out, allowing time for the survey and legal discovery. Outside the courtroom, Victoria caught up to me. Her expression was cold, but her voice was calm, too calm. "This changes nothing," she said through clenched teeth. "I've invested too much into Sun Valley to let some tech bro with a nostalgia complex derail it. Here's my final offer, $2 million. Walk away now, no lawsuits, no more fines. Or keep fighting and I'll make sure you lose everything, Dana Mitchell's free help or not." It was tempting. $2 million could change my life, erase all my debts, buy me a new home, maybe even restart my career in Seattle. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd be selling out my grandfather's legacy. This wasn't just about money anymore. So instead of answering it, I returned to the ranch and stumbled onto something that changed everything. While going through a drawer in Grandpa's old desk, I found a hidden compartment. Inside was a stack of aging documents, and among them, a contract from 1975 between my grandfather and a company called Western Water Resources. The contract granted them groundwater extraction rights from beneath the Carson Ranch in exchange for annual royalty payments. Crucially, the contract outlined exact coordinates that matched the disputed land now sitting under Sun Valley Homes. Dana and I researched further. Western Water had gone bankrupt in the 90s, and their assets, including this water contract, were acquired by Cascade Development Group. Cascade, as it turned out, was the parent company behind all of Victoria's real estate ventures. Not only had Victoria failed to make any royalty payments to the Carson estate, she had also knowingly built over land protected by that contract. The legal implications were staggering. She may have owed my family millions in back royalties, and more importantly, it proved she knew exactly where the boundaries were all along. Now we had something bigger than a boundary dispute. We had fraud, breach of contract, and a corporate cover-up, and we were just getting started. I requested a private meeting with Victoria, and she agreed, likely assuming I was finally ready to accept her inflated buyout offer and end this ongoing battle. We met in her office, a sleek, modern space with a wall of windows overlooking the very development she was so determined to protect. I didn't waste time. I pulled the water rights contract from my folder and placed it on her desk. Her reaction was instant. The confident smile she always wore faltered. "Where did you get this?" she asked, her voice, sharp eyes locked on the document. For the first time, I saw the cracks in her carefully polished facade. "My grandfather was more organized than you gave him credit for," I replied evenly. "This contract proves two things. You knew exactly where the real boundary was. And you knew your company owed us years of unpaid water royalties." Victoria stared at me, expression unreadable as she processed what this meant. "What do you want?" she asked finally, voice low and tense. "I want what's rightfully ours," I said. "The land, the back payments, and a public acknowledgement of what you've done." She laughed, a brittle, joyless sound. "Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? I built all of this from scratch. I've fought for every inch of Sun Valley. You think I'll let it all unravel because some rancher's grandson wants to play land baron? You've already lost more than you know," I said. Her expression darkened. "I've made other problems disappear, Mr. Carson. Don't think I won't make you disappear too. Courtrooms are slow and unreliable. I prefer other methods." "Is that a threat?" I asked calmly, subtly tapping my phone, which had been recording the entire conversation from the moment I walked in. She waved a hand dismissively. "Record all you want. No one will believe you. You're nothing but noise. They all fold eventually. But I wouldn't. Not this time." And in Montana, a one-party consent state, the recording was perfectly legal. Her casual dismissal only strengthened its legitimacy. With that, I walked out, not intimidated, but empowered. We had everything: the original surveys, Bill's notarized report, Carlos's statement, Dana's legal documentation, the water contract, and now Victoria's own voice threatening me and confirming she knew the boundaries all along. We decided it was time to take this public. I scheduled a community meeting on my grandfather's land right along the disputed 10-acre stretch. Word spread fast. On a clear Saturday afternoon, more than 100 residents gathered beneath a large rented tent. I set up a podium, projector, and speaker system. Dana stood beside me, legal documents in hand. Victoria showed up too, arms crossed, jaw tight. I walked the crowd through the timeline, showed the 1952 map, explained the boundary shift, played portions of the recording where Victoria admitted to knowing about the boundaries and water rights. When she tried to shout me down, residents themselves told her to stop. This time they wanted answers. When I finished, the silence was heavy. Then I made my offer. Here's my proposal, I said, addressing the crowd but locking eyes with Victoria. I will forgo legal action on the unpaid water royalties if three conditions are met. First, all HOA fines against my property are permanently dropped. Second, Victoria Reynolds resigns from the HOA board and divests her interests in the remaining undeveloped land. Third, the new HOA leadership negotiates a fair lease agreement with me for the disputed acreage. That way, no one has to move and your homes are protected. Gasps, whispers, murmurs of hope rippled through the crowd. Victoria's face was a mask of fury, but she didn't speak. Not yet. Because now the future of Sun Valley wasn't hers to decide alone. The residents murmured among themselves, clearly weighing the gravity of the proposal. Dana stepped forward and calmly addressed the group, her voice clear and measured. She explained that this agreement was the simplest, most legally sound path forward, one that could save them from years of litigation, potential displacement, and crippling legal expenses. You may not like how we got here, she said, but this solution ensures you stay in your homes without legal uncertainty. Fighting this in court could bankrupt many of you. One by one, people began speaking up in support. A man in his 50s wearing a neatly pressed golf shirt stood up and said, I moved here to retire. I poured my savings into my home. If what Mr. Carson is saying is true, and it sure sounds like it is, then I'm not letting it all go down because someone decided to fake a few lines on a map. I vote we accept his offer. An elderly woman with silver hair chimed in next. We moved here thinking this place would be a safe haven. I didn't sign up to be part of someone's shady land grab. I support this deal. Others echoed similar sentiments, some with frustration, some with gratitude that a solution was even on the table. By the time the meeting concluded, the majority had voiced clear support. An official HOA vote was scheduled for the following week, but the outcome was already apparent. Most residents agreed my proposal was the only viable way forward. As the crowd dispersed, many stopped to shake my hand, thank me for my fairness, or simply offer kind words. They weren't happy about how things had unfolded, but they respected that I wasn't trying to punish them for something they hadn't caused. To my surprise, Gerald White, the same HOA attorney who'd once handed me a cease and desist, approached me with a new tone. Mr. Carson, he said, managing a smile, I believe this resolution is in everyone's best interest. If you need help drafting the lease or coordinating with the board, I'd be happy to assist pro bono, of course. I gave a polite nod. Appreciate the offer, Gerald, but I think Dana's got that handled. Across the field, Victoria stood like a stone, watching silent seething. When the last few residents left, she finally approached. Her heels dug into the soft earth, my land, as she walked. This isn't over, she said through clenched teeth. You don't understand the kind of people you've made enemies of. I held her gaze. I'm not the one who started this fight. You did. I'm just the one who ended it. She stared for a moment longer, then turned on her heel and walked away without another word. The HOA vote took place the following week. It wasn't even close. Victoria was officially removed from the board. Dana was elected in her place, and the board ratified the lease agreement for the disputed land. All the trumped-up fines on my grandfather's property were voided. Victoria was forced to sell her remaining interest in Sun Valley and quietly left the area, her reputation shattered. Sarah, the journalist who had first helped bring the story to light, continued her investigation. Her follow-up articles exposed that Victoria had used similar tactics in other developments across the state. That led to broader inquiries, lawsuits, and eventually the suspension of her real estate license. As for me, I stayed. Instead of selling the ranch, I used the lease income to begin restoring the property. Inspired by entries in my grandfather's journals, I began building what he had once dreamed of, a small agricultural education center for local youth. With help from Barb and other longtime neighbors, I learned the rhythms of ranch life and discovered that my tech skills weren't wasted out here. I used sensors and data systems to manage irrigation efficiently and built a website that connected local farmers to regional restaurants and buyers. What started as a fight for my inheritance became a way to honor my grandfather's legacy and build something meaningful for the next generation. The Sun Valley residents gradually built a stronger, more positive relationship with the ranch. The tension that once divided us faded as understanding grew. With new zoning laws passed to protect property lines and prevent future boundary disputes, the entire area began to develop in a more thoughtful and sustainable direction. Some residents even volunteered at the Carson Agricultural Education Center, bringing their own expertise to help teach children about agriculture, conservation, and rural life. Barb became a near-daily presence at the ranch. She helped me with hands-on training and ranch management, teaching me everything from how to check for fencing damage after a storm to when and how to rotate the grazing pastures. Her stories about my grandfather painted a picture of a man I admired more with each passing week. "James would be proud of you," she said one evening, as we rocked gently on the porch swing, sipping sweet tea while the sun dipped behind the hills. "Not just because you stood your ground, but because you stayed. This life, it's not always easy, but you've made it yours." That's what he hoped for. Word of our victory traveled farther than I expected. I began getting calls and emails from other rural property owners across the state, people facing similar battles with developers or HOAs. They'd ask for advice, for encouragement, sometimes just someone to listen. Dana and I realized there was a need for more than just one-off help, so we founded a small nonprofit that provided legal guidance to landowners unable to afford a fight. We funded it in part with my lease income from the land now officially rented by the Sun Valley HOA. 1 year after that pivotal vote, we held the grand opening for the Carson Agricultural Education Center. The old barn, once weather-beaten and leaning, had been fully restored and converted into a classroom space equipped with simple tech and old-fashioned tools. Outside, we planted demonstration plots for teaching sustainable farming techniques, water conservation, and soil health. Several local schools immediately signed up for field trips. Our summer youth programs were filled months in advance. On the day of the grand opening, I stood on the porch of the freshly painted farmhouse, looking out over the rows of crops in the circle of children, listening intently to Barb explain how to plant tomatoes. Near the gate hung a carved wooden sign bearing my grandfather's favorite saying, "Never underestimate a farmer with an old map." Dana stood beside me, smiling. She'd become more than just a legal ally. She was a close friend, someone who had fought beside me when I didn't know what I was doing and had no idea how much I'd care. "Your grandfather would be proud," she said, her voice soft but certain. "You didn't just protect his legacy, you gave it a whole new chapter." I nodded. "It's strange," I said. "When I lost my job in Seattle, I thought my life was over. I was ready to sell this place and move on. But being here, fighting for this land, it gave me something I didn't even know I needed." As the sun sank behind the mountains and bathed the fields in gold, I realized that I hadn't just inherited a piece of land, I'd inherited a purpose. A community had grown from what once was a battleground. And while Victoria Reynolds had tried to build her empire on stolen land, she made one fatal mistake. She underestimated the resolve of the people she thought were too small to matter. In the end, it wasn't about revenge. It was about roots. And mine were finally planted exactly where they were meant to be. This story reminds us that standing up for what's right, no matter how overwhelming the opposition may seem, is always worth it. In today's world where large corporations and powerful individuals often try to exploit those with fewer resources, we must remember the value of perseverance, community, and the truth. Whether you're protecting family land, defending your rights at work, or challenging unfair systems in your neighborhood, your voice matters. Don't be afraid to ask questions, seek allies, and document everything. The battle may be long, but as this story shows, with courage and determination, even the most ordinary person can protect what's important and create something lasting, not just for themselves, but for generations to come.